I've had my new 2019 Chevy Volt for 1 week now. I'm going to take it out, take it up the coast, up to Squamish and back, and we'll see what type of electric range I get going through the mountains and what the fuel economy is driving back on gas. Let's check this out. So today, I'm going to take my brand new Chevy Volt. It's a 2019 Chevy Volt out, and we're going to do a... That's annoying. We're going to do a test and take it for a drive. I'm going to take it up through the mountains to a certain degree. We're going to see how far this thing goes, and I'm going to show you guys the best way to get the best economy out of driving a second generation Chevy Volt. So when I'm slowing down and stopping, I'm going to be using a combination of both the low range and the paddle, the on-demand regenerative paddle, because they both have an effect on the you don't have to stop, you don't have a stop sign. They both have an effect on regenerative driving. Okay, so first thing you'll notice on the 2019 is when you go in gear, and there's a humming in the background because that humming you hear is actually my inverter to power my camera, so that's the fan on that. But when I put it in gear, hear the it has a pedestrian alert, and as I start to move, it will increase in loudness and in pitch. And there's two speakers in the car. One is in the front and one is in the back. So depending on whether you're in first or in forward or reverse, it will generate this tone. Almost sounds like a spaceship. If I turn off this inverter behind me here, you'll probably hear it a bit better. Let me just shut off the inverter momentarily. Okay, now you'll hear the humming. You won't hear the humming because there's a lawnmower going. But now you should hear the note that gets generated at slow speeds. Roll up the windows, and we're going to turn the climate control on. So I do that just by pushing the power button. Unlike the first generation Chevy Volt, the second generation is much better laid out than the first generation. Gone is that futuristic looking soft touch panel which you controlled everything, and they've replaced it by a touch screen, 4 main buttons: home, skip back, skip forward, and back, as well as a touchscreen. So the touchscreen, we'll talk about that in a bit here as I get onto the road and we talk about the car. So as I'm pulling up to the light, I'll shift it into low range, and if I want more regenerative, I can pull the flappy paddle, and that will slow the car down very quickly, and I don't even have to touch the brake other than to hold the car stopped at a light. We started out with 85 kilometers of range on the battery, so let's see what we get. And the system will keep track of everything. If I just tap the little leaf here, this will give me my energy. So far I've done 1.3 kilometers. I've used 0.3 kilowatts of battery. I haven't used any gas in this car since I've owned it. Actually, I've 0.1 liters per 100 kilometers because I think I used 1 liter when I first got the car because the dealer supplied it to me without a full charge. So I didn't have quite enough battery. When I picked the vehicle up, it had like 12 kilometers of range on the battery, and it ran out just before I got home. But since I've owned it for 1 week now, I have put 733 kilometers on the car, and I have not burned any gas. Car has 915 on it, so it had about 150 or so when I picked the car up. I'm doing the same on this car as I did on my last car. It's got 2 trip counters. My other car, the B trip counter has never been reset since I've owned the car, because I've got both the first generation, which I've had now for 8 years, and the new one. And the old car, I can track exactly how many liters of fuel has gone through that engine in the entire time that I've owned it, because I've never reset the B trip counter. In fact, the B trip counter has maxed out on the mileage range, because it only goes up as high as 99,999.9 kilometers, and then it stops. It doesn't roll over, it just stops. The fuel counter will go to 9,999.99 liters, and then it will stop, I guarantee you. But I'm nowhere near that. I think in the time I've had the car, 8 years, I've gone through just under 2,000 liters of fuel, which seems like a lot, but it's not, because I've had that car for 8 years, and over that 8-year period, I've taken it from Vancouver, BC, which is why I'm in the suburbs of Vancouver. I've taken it to Arizona twice. I've taken it down the Oregon coast to California twice, all the way down. I went down to Big Sur a couple years ago. I've been to Calgary, Alberta. I've been to Medicine Hat. I went to Medicine Hat on one trip. Another trip, I went through Calgary and then down through Pincher Creek and then into Montana. I went through the going to the Sky Road, going through the mountains there, and all through Idaho and back through Washington, and that was one trip. That took me up through into Lake Louise and Banff and Jasper, and then down into the States. And then I've been down to Las Vegas a time. So I've done a lot of miles on the old Volt running in gas mode, because the roads that I took, there's no place to charge, and the old Volt only went 60 kilometers, which is about 40 miles on a charge. This one here goes 80. They say 80. I normally get more than 80, 85 to 90. I think the best I've done so far in a week, I've done 93 kilometers on a charge. And we'll see what type of a charge or what type of range we get today. Couldn't see my camera screen there, didn't know if I was recording. It said flip it around. Yes, it's recording. So I'm shooting this today with two cameras. I'm recording out the window with a Sony, it's an AX33 in 4K. And the back camera here that's looking over my shoulder, which is actually mounted to the passenger seat, is an Nikon Key Mission 170, also operating in 4K. Hopefully that's going to pick up what's on the dash here, and I'll talk to you guys and tell you what the readings are. The trip today, I'm not doing a real super long trip. This is a trip that is just for this video. I'm going to be doing a road trip a little bit later on when I've got my holidays. I'll be taking this on a relatively long trip, and I'll film that, but not to the same degree as I'm doing today. But I'll be filming that as well. But this one here, this little trip that I'm on right now is just to explore how far the battery will go and what happens. So now I'm shifting into low range, which slows the car down. I'll hit the paddle, and that'll bring me under much higher regenerative braking. For those that want to know, the regenerative braking effect by either the paddle or shifting to low range is about 30 kilowatts. If you use a combination of both, it's just under 60, about 58. I'll read out what it says on the screen when I do another stop. But it's typically around 58, 59 kilowatt hours when you use both the on-demand paddle, which is on the left side of the steering wheel, and shift down to low range. So I do a combination of both, and that will maximize my battery life. So right now, I've driven 7.9 kilometers. I've used 1.3 kilowatt hours, and according to the EV range, there's 77 kilometers of battery range remaining. The display on the instrument cluster also tells you how much power you're actually using. So right now I'm using 38 kilowatt hours to accelerate up to the speed limit. And of course, the harder you push on the pedal, the more power you're going to send to the electric motors. It has 120 kilowatts of power, and that will propel the car in kilometers per hour from 0 to 50 kilometers an hour in just around 2 seconds, which is really quick. It will break traction on the tires, even on dry pavement, even with the traction control on. It's moves along pretty good. Let's get in behind this leaf here, as I do need to take the exit. The reason I don't leave it in, some people will suggest they leave their car in L all the time, which you can do. You can leave it in L. I could put it in L and drive it in L, and nothing will change except for when I take my foot off the accelerator, it will go into braking mode, 34 kilowatts of energy going back into the battery, and of course it turns on the brake lights when I do that. Oh, I got an electric car in front of me, a Leaf, and I have a BMW i3 behind me. So here we have 3 electric cars in a row, and then a hybrid, I think it's a hybrid taxi ahead of me. It's like a Toyota Prius V. Anyway, maybe not. So I normally leave it in drive as opposed to L, just because I don't want the car to slow down when I take my foot off the gas. I prefer it to coast. Now I'm going to have to slow down here. Whoops. So I'm going to go into full regenerative braking, and I have 58 is what I got onto there, because there's a bit of a slowdown here for the tunnel, which is surprise, surprise. They got to do something about this. They are apparently going to drop a new tunnel, and they're going to bore a new tunnel under the river and give us an extra 4 lanes. That's what the talk is anyway. We'll see what happens. 2019, right? They were going to build a bridge 2 years ago, and the government changed, and the new government canceled the 10-lane bridge that was going to be built, and now they're going to build apparently a tunnel, another tunnel, or put a second tunnel in. It's from what I hear is going to happen. I'm just going to get out of here and get in the other lane if I can. There's a hole here, so providing nobody else jumps in there, I'll get into the left lane. So I guess I'll talk about the infotainment system on the new Volt. I actually had to use the brakes that time because everybody's come to a stop. And this isn't even rush hour. This is a Saturday when I'm shooting this. I tell you, this bloody tunnel. I think some people freak out when they go through it and they get on the binders, and it just creates chaos behind them. Oh, there's another electric car beside me, another BMW i3. So that's 2 of them. 2 BMW i3s and a Leaf that is now just slightly ahead of me, because he got in the fast lane before I did. Fast lane that's not going very fast. Features that the car has: it has LED low beam for the headlights, but the high beams are conventional halogen. Like to see them LEDs as well, but it is what it is. The LED low beams actually do a pretty good job. Let's go on to the infotainment system. So infotainment, if I press the home button, I can select audio, phone, the energy meter, which is what we were just using, and then users. You can set up multiple users so that each user has their own preferences. I haven't set that up. settings. It has Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and apps, which you can download certain apps if you have the 4G LTE package, which I don't. I'm going to go to audio. Audio, there are a couple different options here. The car has, there is no CD player. None of the new cars, as far as I know, have a CD player anymore. But it does support music on a USB stick. And it also supports an SD card. Now I currently have a 128 gig SD card loaded with about over 22,000 tracks on it. You have to format the SD card in FAT32. It will not recognize if it's in NTFS, and it will not recognize it if it's in EXFAT. It has to be in FAT32, but other than that, 128 gig memory card works, and I've got one in the dash right here. And I've chosen that route as opposed to, say, using one of these, which I could also do, just because it's cleaner. It just slips into the dash and you don't see it, and it still leaves me my 2 USB ports plus the aux port is still available. So if I want to plug my phone in to charge it, for example, I've got 2 USB ports. Also has 2 power points, one in the front and one in the back. The one in the front is actually powering up my dash cam, and the one in the back I'm using to power my inverter, which is being used to power up the cameras that we're recording this on. Infotainment. AM, FM, and XM, Sirius XM, selected by the touchscreen. Right now I've got my SD card, which I've named High Voltage, so I can play music off this. George Benson. Select AM or FM, so AM.
Very highly respected, very well liked. Randy Ennis decided to heck with it, threw in the towel.
FM. To mute that before we pull a copyright strike. I was going to grab some royalty-free stuff so that I could have it playing in the background, but I decided, you know what, cameras aren't going to be running full time, so we'll deal with that in post for the long stretches where I might not be talking. Okay, that's the infotainment for the music. It's also got your speakerphone or your cell phone. So get that off the screen. And your energy monitor. Tells you the temperature and the time outside as well. And this tells me exactly what's going on. Now I can bring up different screens on here. Right now I've just got it in the energy usage mode, which is telling me right now that I've gone 16.7 kilometers. I've used 3 kilowatt hours of the battery. There's 15 kilowatt hours that are usable in this battery. The gauge tells me I have 68 kilometers remaining of range. So that you can see, with the 17.2 I've done with 68 remaining, that is well over the 80 kilometer estimated range, which is what the car, they say 80 is what they claim, but it does much better than that. So 80 kilometers is 50 miles. Most people find that the car is getting around 55 to 57 miles, which equates more to like 90 to 93 kilometers. And that's what I have been finding in the week that I've owned the car, is that I am getting those type of numbers off of the lithium-ion battery pack. And I've yet to run it into gas mode. So today's trip, I'm going to drive up to Squamish and go and have lunch in Squamish, just because it's a nice day for a drive, and I want to see what happens when this thing goes into gas mode and how it performs. So I figure a little trip up the mountains and nice little drive, some nice scenery, and you guys are along for the ride, and we'll see how the car performs. Now done almost 19 kilometers. 19 kilometers now, 66 remaining. So that would be 85, which is right what it said when I started out. It said I had 85 kilometers of range. The computer is very accurate in determining battery range. At least I've found so far. And my first generation Volt, which now has almost 150,000 kilometers on it, Also, the range is very accurate. And I will point out that in the 8 years that I've had my first generation Chevy Volt, which I still own, my wife drives it now, there has been no degradation of the battery whatsoever. It is still getting the full rated range. So I'm just shifting down to low range because I see the traffic is slowing down a bit. So that I could have pulled the paddle on the steering wheel and achieved the same thing. It's just habit, because in the years I've been driving the other Volt, I've always used the low range to slow the car down. One big change for the second generation over the first generation is the second generation turns on the brake lights when you start to slow down, whereas the first generation didn't, which was always a bit nerve-wracking because you had to make sure the guy behind you was actually paying attention. Oh, there's a Tesla. See, electric cars are everywhere around here. And the guy ahead of me doesn't have a license plate on the back of his car. I wonder if he's aware of that. Well, that guy's a long ways from home. He's driven his Tesla in from Alberta. Something that you can do now in a full electric because of the charging infrastructure that's in place. I didn't want a full electric myself because when I go on road trips, I generally don't go on the main roads because I like to explore different areas, different parts of the province, different parts of Canada and the United States. I like to go to the roads less driven, let's say. I like to see the country and see all the neat sights. And unfortunately, the level 3 charging stations just aren't there yet. Maybe someday they will be, but at this point in time, at least the last road trip I did, they weren't. So I think I'll shut the camera off now for a few minutes, and we'll pick it up again when I get downtown, when I get through all these traffic lights, because there's not much to see here. So we're going down Granville Street now, heading towards downtown, shifting to low range to slow down. I don't need to use the paddle this time because I put it into low range soon enough that I was able to bring the speed down, but if I was going a little faster, I would have probably used the paddle as well, or I could have used just the paddle. This time I'll use both though, because the light's gone red, so both the paddle and the low range slows the car right down. And now I'm just using the paddle by itself. That'll bring me down to 4 kilometers an hour. Put the brake on to stop the car. Again, the brake lights are on, regardless whether I shift to low range. If you're in low range, as soon as you take your foot off the gas and the car starts to slow down, the brake lights come on. If you pull the regenerative brake on demand, then it will put the brake lights on at the same time. So there's no risk in the guy behind me not knowing what I'm doing, which is a good feature. So the trip's going to take me through downtown, the west side of Vancouver. Right now we're getting into the really expensive part of town. Well, all of Vancouver is expensive. You have to be a millionaire basically to live here because the cost of housing here is just ridiculous. When I say ridiculous, you can't get into anything for under a couple $1 million these days, pretty much. Everything's over $1 million for anything, for nothing. Some knock me over houses have sold for $3 to $4 million just for a lot. It's just crazy. He's driving. This time I'm using just the regenerative on-demand paddle because I'm not going that fast. That'll slow me right down to a crawl. Won't bring the car to a complete stop. It takes it down to 2 kilometers per hour. It won't completely stop it though. There's residents around here that got cameras all over their place. It's crazy. Like these are some pretty pricey pads. These private estates that have got 3, 4, 5 houses on them with their private driveways, and yeah, they're all secured like Fort Knox. Okay, now we're heading down Granville Street onto the Granville Street Bridge here at West 7th. It's all downhill from here, as they say. Use the regen on demand to keep the speed down. Travel 30 kilometers, and there's 56 remaining. So we're still at that 85, 86 kilometer estimate range. I've actually gained a kilometer range. It'll get eaten up when I start getting into the hills, because once I start climbing hills, we're going to need more battery power, so the range is going to drop once I start getting into the hills of North Vancouver and up the Squamish Highway. I will burn up my battery for sure. I know it's probably a little bit late to be doing a video on the Chevy Volt, because now that General Motors has made the bonehead move to cancel the car, another Tesla. But there's still lots of them out there, and in the used market, there'll be people that are interested in buying one, so this video might help them make the decision to pull the trigger and pick one up. I think this is probably one of the best cars that's ever been made, at least my first generation. I've had no issues whatsoever. No major issues at all in 8 years of ownership, which is pretty good, considering that every other vehicle I've owned, and I've owned several, have had major problems, by the time they got to those number of miles on them. My last vehicle, I had to change. I've had to do the brakes on it. It was due for its second. It was a hybrid too. It was due for its second brake job, but I had the electric power steering controller go out on it, and I had the transaxles had to be replaced because the U-joints on the transaxles went bad. So I had to have them replaced. And what else went wrong with it? Oh, the auto door unlock failed, and it wouldn't unlock the driver door. I had to use a key for it. So it had some problems. Vehicles prior to that I've owned, I had one that had a constant water leak, and they never were able to fix that. That was another Ford. And the Ford I had before that, the engine blew up on it at 120,000 kilometers. It was an Exploder, Ford Exploder. The engine blew up at 120,000 kilometers. So I've had some problems with Fords, and I've had problems with other cars as well. Had a Mercedes-Benz diesel that decided to throw a seal in the turbo, and it went nuclear. It basically melted down. It went into a runaway situation, and well, that was the end of that. The engine was thrashed. It required a total rebuild, and it was a very costly repair. Back to the Volt. I think that this was a dumb move by General Motors. I think the reason that they've done it is because they want to concentrate more on the full electric vehicle. But I've heard rumors, and I'm sure these rumors, there's probably a fair bit of truth to the rumors, is that the Voltec power plant that is used in the Volt is going to make a return, and it is going to return in an SUV or a crossover. That's the rumors that I have heard around, and those rumors also came from the dealer. GM dealer, when I was buying this car, had suggested the same thing, that there was going to probably be a hybrid, plug-in hybrid SUV or crossover coming out in the next couple years that would use this powertrain, which makes total sense because Mitsubishi have their plug-in SUV, and Ford is reintroducing their Escape hybrid as a plug-in for the 2020 model year. So it'll be interesting to see what type of range that the Ford will have when it comes out. The Mitsubishi right now, the range is an absolute joke. It gets, I think it's 37 kilometers is all it gets on a charge. And the compared to the Volt, which will do 90. So the Mitsubishi one right now, it's a nice vehicle. I've taken one out for a test drive, and it is a nice vehicle, but the problem is that it doesn't have much range. It only has 37 kilometers, which puts it on par with the Prius, the new Prius. What's it called? Prime. It has a range of 40 kilometers, which is 25 miles, which is really, it's not enough. Nowhere near enough range on the battery. I found that with the first generation Volt was 60 kilometers. That was barely enough. There was times where when I was doing my daily driving around, there'd be trips that I would make that it would go into the gas engine and I would burn a little bit of fuel. On that car, I could make a tank of gas, which was only 36 liters. A tank of gas would last me 6 months. But if I had an extra 10 or 20 kilometers, a tank of gas would last me a year. And that's what I figure will happen with this car, is that I won't even carry any gas in it. I'll carry around a quarter of a tank or something just for emergencies, just for the odd time that it's needed. The only time I'm going to actually keep any gas in this thing is when I'm planning a road trip. If I'm not planning on going on a road trip, then I'm going to run it down and keep the fuel down at a relatively low level, because I won't need it. Construction work. What else is new? So here we are coming up on the Lionsgate Bridge now. I'm in the counterflow lane. Counterflow lane is open today. So basically what we have is we have 2 lanes northbound and 1 lane south. This is another bad bottleneck here. This bridge should also be replaced with a bigger one. So this is now the reversible lane. That'll take me into West Vancouver. So here's the first narrows of the Lionsgate Bridge. Now completed 37.9 or 37.8, yeah, we'll call it 38 kilometers because it's now 38 even, and there's 48 remaining. One thing I will note is the difference, and the reason I use the shifter a lot of times when I'm slowing down is because if I shift it into low range, it'll stay there until I shift it back. The problem with the flappy paddles, as they like to be called, is that, well, if you shift your hand on the wheel, you can't hold the paddle. If you're turning, if you're going around a corner, you can't be under regenerative braking because you're going to let go of it, and then you're going to lose your braking. Also, the regenerative on-demand paddle, if you're holding the paddle in and you touch the gas, it will disable it, and it won't turn it back on again when you let your foot off the gas. You actually have to release the paddle and pull the paddle in a second time to re-engage the regenerative braking. Whereas if you shift to low range, you get on the gas, you'll accelerate, but when you take your foot off the gas, it'll start to decelerate again. So I use this one actually more than I use the paddles. I usually use the paddle after I've shifted into low. Or unless I'm just coming up to a light, like this case, I'll just pull the paddle on for a second, slow me down, and then the brake to hold the vehicle. 40.7 kilometers, 48 remaining. So 88, almost 89. That's what the range on the battery is now. So I got to get in the left lane coming up here. I should have probably got over there already because it looks like there's a lineup. Oh, there should be 2 lanes to turn left up here. I got to turn left to get on the freeway, but I think there's 2 lanes. Yeah, there is. I've almost used half of the battery. I'm at 7 kilowatt hours. My gauge on here is showing just over half of the battery remaining. When this gets to 7.5, it should be at half because there's 15 kilowatt hours of energy. Now the old Volt, when I drove this freeway a couple years ago, I got right to where Highway 99, well, I got right to Horseshoe Bay, which is 13 kilometers up the road. That's where I got before it switched over. Now I'm going to get a lot further than that this time, for sure. But that's how far I got on the old Volt, was right at the point where the ferry exits from Highway 99. And then Highway 99, you see the Sky Highway started, that's right where it switched over. This drive, I'm not intending to go into mountain mode. There are 4 modes on the Chevy Volt. My old one only had 3 modes because it was the very first generation, but they added the hold mode in the next year, in the 2013 model. They added the hold mode. The 4 modes that the car will operate in is normal, which is what we're in now. There's a mode called mountain mode, and what mountain mode does is it puts a percentage of charge, a higher percentage of charge in the battery. And the reason they do that is so that if you're on a very long, steep incline, you'll have enough power to get over without running out of battery power. Not as big an issue on the second generation because the gas engine is a more powerful engine. It's a 1.5 liter direct injected engine, which puts out, I think it's 120 horsepower, something like that, whereas the first generation, it was only like 84 horsepower. So it was more important to have some extra power in the battery if you were on a very, very steep incline, like going over the Coquihalla or the Crow's Nest Pass and stuff, where there was a very, very steep hill, because you could find yourself on the first generation Volt limited to speeds of around 80 clicks. Shouldn't be an issue on this one because the engine is more powerful, but it does have the mountain mode. But I'm not going to use it on this trip. I may use it in the summer when I do go over some of the really big mountains. I might use it on those ones just to build up a little bit of a reserve power. So there's also sport mode. Sport mode gives you a more it doesn't really give you any more power. It just changes the way the pedal responds, so that you have more power without pressing the gas pedal quite as far. Gives you a more sporty response out of the accelerator. but it doesn't do anything as far as making the car faster. You've still got 120 kilowatt power for the engine, regardless whether it's in normal or sport. It just changes the feel of the accelerator, and it changes the regenerated braking and so forth. Makes it a little more aggressive. And there's hold mode. And hold mode is a mode that is completely useless here, but in some parts of the world where you have to pay a congestion tax when you go into the city, but electric vehicles get a pass. So what that allows you to do is, if you select hold mode, it will keep the charge in the battery and you will burn gas even if the battery is fully charged. The idea behind that is if you're driving in from the suburbs and you've got a long drive to go to get there, say you've got a 50-mile drive to get to the city, but the city has a congestion tax for vehicles, but electric vehicles don't have to pay the congestion tax, then you would drive in on gas on the hold mode and switch back to normal once you got to city limits, and that would preserve your entire battery for driving in the city. Therefore, you didn't have to pay the smog tax, right, or the congestion tax. Cities like London have that, but that doesn't apply to us here, so there's no point in using it. There's no point in even talking about it other than how it works. For this drive, I'm not changing any mode. I'm putting it just in regular, normal mode because this is just a normal drive, and I want to try and maximize my battery range and maximize my fuel economy, so that when the drive is done, when I get home, we'll look at the numbers and see how much fuel I burned and so forth. And we'll see how much regenerated braking, because I'll be going up the mountain for a bit here, and then I'll be coming back down on the way back. So I should be able to regenerate a fair bit of power and recover a fair bit of power on the way back. So here we're just entering the Sea to Sky Highway. This is where my other car switched over to gas, right on this curve. So 53 kilometers basically is what I got on the first generation Volt coming up here, which fell short of the 60, but there was a fair, there's some hills involved here. Normally I get around 60 on it. I normally get 59, 60, and I got like 50, 54, which right around this area where it switched over. Anyway, I've got 31 remaining. And we'll just see how the 31, how accurate that is now that I'm going uphill. I 9.7 kilowatts now, but I'm in regenerated braking, so we'll put some back into the battery. Ahead. Looks like someone's getting a ticket for excessive speed. Looks that way anyway. Unless it's an accident. But it looks like someone's... dumbass on his bike is getting his bike impounded. That's what happens when you go over the speed limit down there. It's 80 kilometers an hour. If you hit 120, you lose your ride for a week. They're always down here, right? Like I don't drive this road more than 90. I might creep up to 95 if I'm going down a hill, but I generally won't go this road because the cops sit here constantly. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. turkey shoot. I mean, the cops sit here all the time. This is such a, you know, usually guys on motorcycles too, and fancy cars. But I mean, they drive like idiots down here, and the cops are always here. They're always catching people on here. And some people they catch are just going at ludicrous speeds, like, you know, 140, 150 in an 80 zone. I've completed 59 kilometers so far, and according to my EV range meter, I have 30 remaining, and that's starting to go through the mountains, so I should get darn close to 90 kilometers. "34 kilometers remaining to Squamish." That's where I'm going to end this little journey. I'm going to go for lunch, and then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to go back home, because that should expel my battery, and we'll drive back on gas and see how it performs on gas. Kilometers is remaining on the battery, and the car just transitioned to gas. I got 88 kilometers. 88.0 is the range that I got. 14.6 kilowatt hours what was used. And now the engine is on, and we're burning gas. And I don't know if you guys can read this. It's being shot in 4K, so hopefully you can read the screen, but now it'll show me what my fuel is going to be used for the rest of the trip. It says I have a fuel range of 381 kilometers because my tank is not full. They didn't give me a full tank of fuel when I bought the vehicle. And look at that, there's an EV charging station in 2 kilometers. I wonder I would be lucky to be able to get on it. I think that's only a level 3 charger anyway. It looks like it's looks to be a pretty big one. 3-phase transformers. Yeah, that's a level 3 charger. That doesn't help me one little bit, does it? Might help someone who's got a full EV that needs a charge, but hey, I'm driving a super EV. I got my own power plant on board. I don't have to worry about that, so I guess I will not be picking up a charge as I thought I might here, because it's the wrong type of plug. So as I make my way back, 10 Tesla charging stations here in Squamish, right behind the Boston Pizza, and a couple of level 3 chargers. Well, one at least, but no level 2 chargers here, so no charging for me. I have to burn gas, which is fine because I have it to be burned. If we look at the usage so far, I drove in at 88 kilometers on the way here, and or 88 kilometers was on metric, and for the last 18 kilometers I burned gas. Now, how much gas did I burn? Well, for that 18 kilometers of gas driving, I burned 0.8 liters of fuel. Now, to put that into perspective, 18.0 kilometers, 0.8 liters. I'll put the conversion up on the screen here, but there's 3.785 liters to 1 US gallon, or 4.54 liters to 1 imperial gallon. And as far as the mileage goes, there's 1.6 kilometers in a mile. I can actually put this into metric, or into imperial mode here. Kilometers, metric, US. Let me just switch this here, get around the corner, and we'll switch it to US so you guys can see. So there's what we've done. So now I'm in miles per hour, so I got to calculate out the speed in miles per hour because everything's posted in kilometers. But here in US miles per gallon, I've driven 11.4 miles, and I've used 1/4 of a gallon, or just under 0.24 of a US gallon to drive 11.6 miles. See, now I gotta think because I'm driving 50 miles an hour, and that's 80 kilometers per hour. So now I gotta think metric back to universal if I leave the car in this mode so that it shows. So 11.9, 12 miles to 1/4 of a gallon. So that would be 48 miles per gallon if it can continue at this rate. Which is good. I'm gonna have to stop for this light, so we'll just pull up here. This is kind of actually good that I wasn't able to get a charge in Squamish, because that way the trip up here was roughly almost 50% of the way up on battery. So I'll be going all the way home on gas, although I might take a different route. Rather than go right through the downtown core, I think I'm going to go through North Vancouver, because I just don't feel like driving through the city with all the traffic. So I'm going to go back over the Second Narrows Bridge. So it's going to be a little longer route home than coming out this way, but shouldn't make any difference, because, you know, still at 40 plus miles per gallon, it's not going to make much of a difference in terms of what the cost of this trip is. It's pretty reasonable. The fuel economy of this thing is very good. Above average to those advocates of the Prius who will champion it as having the best fuel economy. I will disagree with that. After driving the first generation Volt, I know how good the fuel economy on it was, and this one's better. Now, one thing that's different on the second generation Volt versus the first generation. The first generation Volt could operate as a full EV, electric vehicle, until the battery was depleted, just like the second generation. The gas engine is not involved in any way, shape, or form at all while the battery has a charge in it. All of the other hybrids on the market, including the plug-in hybrids, the Mitsubishi and the Prius, for example, the gas engine will start over a certain speed, and that speed is 120 kilometers to 130 kilometers per hour, depending on the model. But the gas engine will always start on those vehicles at highway speed. The gas engine will also start, if you put your foot into it, on those vehicles. Even if the battery is fully charged, if you stand on it, the engine is going to start. That is not the case with the Volt. The Volt, the engine does not enter the equation until the battery is fully depleted. And only then does the engine kick in. And even at that, the engine only runs intermittently. It runs and then it stops. Like right now, if I go to flow, you'll see that the engine is running. The difference now it's on engine power alone. The battery is out of the equation. Now there's a little bit of charge going back into the engine because we're generating more power than we need. The big difference between the first generation Volt and the second generation is the way that the system is configured. On the first generation Volt, it operates as a series or parallel hybrid, depending on the situation. Typically, it's in series hybrid mode, which means that the gas engine is only generating power for the electric motor at the battery. When the engine is running, it's generating power, and the main motor is using that power to drive the vehicle. The first generation Volt can configure itself as a parallel hybrid, where some power from the engine will be passed to the wheels. The second generation is a parallel hybrid only. So when the engine is running, the engine is always going to contribute power to drive the vehicle. And that's because that's more efficient than just generating power and then using the power to drive the wheels. A series hybrid is not as efficient as a parallel hybrid. The first generation Volt could operate either way because the electric motors that it had a large traction motor and it had a smaller generator. So it was more efficient in its design to operate as a series hybrid. In the second generation Volt, the two electric motors are the same size. They are 60 kilowatts each, and they both operate in conjunction with each other. So one can be operating as a generator and the other one operating as a power unit, as well as the gas engine applying power. Or it can operate as a single motor unit. It can operate as two motors, and it can operate as two motors with the gas engine. And one of those motors can then recover power. So that's when you see what's happening here. Right now I'm in full power regenerative. The engine is off, as you can see. The engine's out. Now the engine comes back on. But whenever the engine is running on the second generation, it is contributing power to the wheels. And it's connected with a one-way clutch. So when the engine starts, power gets diverted to the wheels. The engine can drop out and stop, and you don't really notice it. But what you do notice on the Volt 1, the first generation, you don't notice when the engine starts or stops at all. There's no indication in the car when you're driving. You don't feel anything. On the second generation, when you're under engine power and you take your foot off the gas, you can actually feel the engine start to slow you down a bit until it disconnects, because it's coupled. So the engine itself is actually providing some input, and you can feel it. No different than a regular car when it changes gears. When your automatic transmission, for example, shifts gears and you can feel it, this is the same. But you can certainly tell when it's switching on and off there, just switched off. It's subtle. Now it's back on. Didn't notice it come on, but when it went off, I certainly did there for a bit. Now you can actually hear the motor running because the speed changes. Unlike the first generation Volt, the engine pretty much ran at a constant rate. This one here, because it's going through a CVT, the engine RPM will go up and down on its own. See that I've done 18 miles and I've used 0.44 US gallons. the hill here. I got no power. I got no problem at all. I've still got my 120 kilowatts of power. Probably just burned a little more gas there, but power-wise, doesn't matter whether you're on battery power or whether you're on hybrid power. The car has the same amount of pickup regardless, whether you're on battery or engine power. Let's say I'm not going to get to try the mountain mode yet because this drive is not that mountainous, but when I take my car out in a couple of weeks, when I head out on a little photography trip and I've got my car loaded with a bunch of cameras and stuff, I'll be going to some higher mountains, and I will probably go into mountain mode at that point just to try it out when I go over the Coquihalla, for example, because that's a very long steep incline that goes for about 40 kilometers straight up. You know, so it's like I think it's a 7 or 8% grade that goes for 40 kilometers, which is what 25 miles, I guess, straight up at 7 or 8%. So it's a long climb. So in that case, I'll put it into mountain mode just so that and the speed is up there is 120. So I'll put it into mountain mode just so I don't have to worry about running out of juice. What I'm going to be doing as soon as I get home. As soon as I get home, I'm unloading the cameras. I'm going to drag my bike out and take it out for a ride, because it's been in the shop for the past couple weeks. I started it up when I put it on the road and got one ride out of it, and it made a noise from the engine. And it didn't sound like a good noise. And what happened was a piece of the compensator, which is a series of springs and metal plates that are on the crankshaft. What their job is they work like a shock absorber to smoothen out the power pulses from the pistons, because it's a V-twin, and the V-twins, the Harleys, generally aren't the smoothest running engines. So they use essentially there are 3 springs that are on a metal plate that are used to buffer the shock of the power stroke from the 2 pistons, so that you get a nice smooth ride. Anybody who's ever ridden a Harley will know what I'm talking about, but at an idle they shake like crazy. But when you're riding them on the freeway, the ride is very, very smooth. And that's due in part to this compensator that's on the crankshaft. Well, something on the compensator broke, and it sent shrapnel through the primary drive, which got tangled up in the primary chain and got shredded into a bunch of little pieces of metal. And those little pieces of metal stuck to the magnet on the inside of the rotor for the charging system, and broke the rotor, ripped the stator to shreds, and basically created a big mess. So a bunch of parts later, a bunch of labor at the motorcycle repair shop, and I've got it back. So I got it back yesterday. So I'm going to be taking that out for a spin. I just realized I'm going just a little bit over the speed limit here, so we'll just bring it back a bit. That guy on that bike is going kind of fast, and I'm just following him. Try using that excuse to the officer at the side of the road, right? I just following the car ahead of me. I didn't realize he was going the speed he was. I'll let him get the ticket. know if you guys caught that sign back there. But it was a sign of a cyclist with his front wheel broken and he's going over the handlebars. I guess it's to warn cyclists to watch where they're driving because there's drainage grates on the shoulder there that will take your front wheel off. On the shoulder where cyclists would ride, there's drainage grates. Okay, now we're into Vancouver, and as you can see, the miles per gallon, because of a little bit of downhill there's no more hills going up, has improved to 40.5 miles per gallon. I'm going to get into the right lane here. It's going to pass these cars and get into the right lane because I have to take an exit up ahead and start heading towards home. Notice the headlights should come on automatically here. There we go. Headlights just came on. Auto headlights. I was using a combination of the low range as well as the paddle to slow me down coming down the hills there. I didn't have to touch the brakes once. Which means the brakes on this thing are going to last just as long as the brakes on my other one, which are now at 148,000 or 149,000 kilometers on my other car. And the original brakes are still very good. I wonder if I should boundary or Rupert. Maybe I'll take Rupert. Six of one and half a dozen of the other, right? As to which way I go. My fuel gauge is starting to move down a bit, the gas fuel gauge, because they didn't give me a full, nice running the red light guy. They didn't give me a full, there's a red light, there is a red light camera there. I hope it got tagged. They didn't give me a full tank of gas. It used to be when you bought a new car, they'd fill the tank up, right? Now they give you 30 liters of fuel. I think it's a 36 liter tank on this thing. They give you 30 liters of fuel. So you can imagine if you got a truck that's got a 120 liter tank, you spend 70, 80 grand on a big truck and it's got a 120 liter fuel tank and they give you 30 liters. They're giving you like a quarter of a tank of fuel. That's almost a slap in the face. I remember when I bought my last full gas car, which was in 1995, I bought a Thunderbird Super Coupe. That thing has like it's 80 liter fuel tank. It's big. It's like 15 or 16 gallons. 70 or 80 liter fuel tank. It's a fairly good sized tank. And they filled it up for me. And gas at the time, back then, was probably, 95. I forget how much gas was then, but it wasn't anything like it is now. It might have been $1 a liter for premium back then, if that. But they filled the tank up full. They gave me a card at the dealership, and it was to fill the tank. And I just drove over to the nearest gas station and filled the thing right up to the brim. Now, not today. There's another guy that's running a light that's a real stale yellow. It was actually red before he got into the intersection. We're almost back. Audi's opening it up. Let's just keep up with them. Oh, I think that's fast enough. Just took it up to 95 miles per hour there. I think we'll back that down. Knock that down big time. It's got a fair bit of zip, even with the engine running. No difference in power. It performs the same whether it's running on pure battery power or whether it's running on engine power. The acceleration is the same. Performance is the same. So just getting back to the home base here. My average on fuel economy, it was 40.9 until I booted it there for a bit and burned up a bit of gas. But 40.7 miles to the gallon, done 75.4 miles, used 1.85 gallons of fuel, 54.7 miles electric for 14.6 kilowatt hours. So I put a lot more miles, or a few more, 54 going there and 75 coming back, because for one, I took a different route back. I took a little bit longer route back. I think I was 54 miles on electric power in the last like 10 to get to where I was going. So it should have been like an extra, it should have been about 74. Well, I guess it's about right. I guess it wasn't much different, because I think I put about 10 miles on, 5 or 10 miles on. I'll have to go back and look at the footage. But I think it was that around 10 miles maybe. I think it was like 16 kilometers, something like that. So anyway, it's pretty close. A little bit longer the way coming back though than going there. But average 40.7 miles per gallon. And that will pretty much end it. Now we've seen how the second generation performs. It actually performs better than the first generation. As good as the first generation Volt was, I think the second generation is better. It's unfortunate, as I said before, that they've stopped making the car, because I think that was a mistake. I think this is a great car, and I really do hope that those rumors that are circulating around that they're going to turn this power plant into an SUV or a crossover, because if they do, there will be one of them sitting in my driveway next. I'll trade the first generation in for another one of these if they come out with one as an SUV or a crossover. Do that without thinking twice about it. Love the car. Thanks for coming along on this little journey to try it out and see how it performs in the mountains. That's great. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one real soon.